Hey guys, it's Eric here, and I'm back with another episode of the Engaging with Eric podcast. In this episode, I'm joined by Larissa Trăistaru to discuss the rise of spirituality and astrology in the age of Generation Z. Larissa is a law student at Queen Mary University of London. She's very passionate about topics such as spirituality, astrology, arts, and fashion. And recently, she's been focusing on exploring and expanding her creative self as much as possible. In the episode, we discuss how astrology first caught her attention and her relationship with it, what astrology and spirituality have to say that is beneficial in her view, what she has to say to the criticisms of astrology that often relegate it to the status of a fantastical anti-scientific tradition, how spirituality compares to religion and which of the two she believes is preferable, and why pop culture and many of today's young people have gravitated towards spirituality and astrology as of late. This was a relevant, energetic, and fun conversation that I certainly took a lot from. In the conversation, I draw on a lot of what I raised in my video entitled Why Religion Matters, which you can watch on my YouTube channel, Eric Gosa. And I advise you to check it out because you're probably a wise person listening to this podcast, listening to this YouTube video, and checking out that YouTube video would, I think, be a symptom of your wisdom. Nonetheless, I hope you take as much from this conversation as I did, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did participating in it. Without further ado, here it is. Hey guys, it's Eric here, and I am back with another episode of the Engaging with Eric podcast. And in this episode, I'm joined by a very good friend of mine, Miss Larissa.
Hello, Eric's subscribers. It's very nice to meet you all.
And in this episode, Larissa and I are going to be discussing astrology. I'm coming from Ireland, growing up in Ireland too. I was never really around many people who ever referenced astrology for any reason. I came from a Nigerian community, so Christianity was the main religion in that context. I come from the Republic of Ireland, so Catholicism was the main religion in that context. So in my school or at church or in my local community, these religions were the ones that I came into contact with mostly. I heard a lot of people talk about star signs and things like this, the kind of popularized aspects of astrology, but I never really heard much about astrology as a concept, as a meaning system, as a possible scientific field. I know some people argue that until I met my dear friend Larissa. She broke it down for me, explained her relationship with astrology, which was incredibly fascinating. And it definitely implored me to take the subject a bit more seriously as something not to frown down at, but instead to consider and to engage with. So I decided to have Larissa on the podcast to delve deeply into the subject, generally speaking, to allow for us to learn from her because she's a funnel of insight and wisdom in regards to astrology, but also to share her experience with regard to astrology too. So Larissa, I guess my first question, before we get into your experiences, what is your understanding of astrology? Like, how would you define it in your context? Because I know there are so many different definitions. Many people interpret it in different ways. They place it in different contexts. So how would you define astrology?
Yeah, so it's not such a hard question, but at the same time could imply many things because it's not necessarily a science that is traditionally understood as a science because its accuracy cannot really be scientifically tested. But for me, I think astrology is more of a practice, an expression of spirituality, which again is not necessarily something scientific. It's more on a belief kind of starting point. So to me, astrology is a form of expression of spirituality that studies the positions of planets, constellations, time, and the way the planets move around at different times of days and time zones, and that it's basically following that study of how planets work. It's really just more of a personal map of an individual's potential to his activities, such as love or career, or like personal lessons that you might have or discover. So to me, it's a very broad people that maybe are not necessarily believers would be like, what is she on about? But I think like in order to get a grasp of it, I think you should just keep a really open mind. It's not more about what it studies, it's more about how you can resonate with it. So it includes energy, uh, uh, intuition, focuses a lot of intuition on your inner self, inner potential that you can discover. And I think astrology could help you understand paths in your life that you can take upon and stuff like that.
Really fascinating. That was a great explanation. Of course, I did a bit of research before this episode, and a lot of what you said are common threads throughout what a lot of people shared to sort of explain astrology. So no, that's really fascinating. And you mentioned something that I think is really critical that we'll touch on later in the episode. You said that you see astrology as more of a meaning system than you would as a quote traditional science. I know there's a lot of debate around that amongst, I'd say, a marginal group. Is it a science? Is it a belief system singularly? But you claim that you see it as a meaning system, and we'll definitely get back to that later. But my next question would be, like, I'm sure you didn't grow up with astrology. Maybe
No, I mean, I kind of had like a pretty Christian upbringing as well, because I'm originally from Romania, which is no, it's an Eastern European country and is known for being quite religious in the traditional sense. And my parents are also religious, but not like very fanatic. They believe in the understanding of God as the Bible describes it. But I think for me, when I was first introduced to astrology, was I think like everyone else through online platforms and social media and your daily horoscopes that you read on magazines or TV. And I think it's it's usually a very commercial portrayal of astrology, which I think is many of the reasons why people get a wrong idea of it. Because it's mostly general characteristics that could fit into any person. So if you're like, oh, it looks like Aquarius is gonna have a bad day because they're, I don't know, pretty dreamy people. So anything can happen to them. Like, it's a description that can fit into for many people. So I think that's why many people really define astrology as being something serious. So for me, I was introduced through online platforms, but then I had a lot of people in my life that really took it very seriously, and I think I really engaged with it, and I started researching more and reading more and just being more open to it.
really interesting. So that's how you came to it. So it was through interacting with others and the internet, because the internet had a huge, I think that had a colossal influence on how a lot of young people came to interact with astrology. I know when I was younger in high school, as you call it in Ireland, secondary school, people had the apps that would tell them like their daily horoscope, I believe.
Yeah, I have it. You should download it. It's very
Well,
good.
for a lot of people that I know, this was their first contact with astrology, and a lot of people didn't even put the name astrology to it. They just saw it as a cool phenomenon. So it's interesting to see how that led you towards it and how interaction with your
Yeah,
friends.
I mean, to me, I think there's a difference between the astrology you read on Facebook or on Instagram, and astrology is something very serious if you really resonate with it. Because I mean, I think you can have bad. I don't even know if you call it as an astrologist. I don't know how you call it in English. I know in Romanian there's definitely a word for it, but the person that basically studies and practices astrology as a certificated person. I think there's a difference between being a good one and being a bad one, just as there's a difference between being a involved therapist and being a therapist that does it for wrong reasons, like I want to get rich, or I want to just have a normal job that can, like, I think there's bad reasons you can do it for and good reasons you can do it for. And I think the same applies to astrology. I think there are people that are gifted with a more enhanced intuitions and are much more capable of they have a power of manifestation, and they have an energy level that resonates with astrology, that are, and it's, I think there are people that are more gifted than others. So I think that also matters on who you choose to believe, what tells you about your daily horoscope.
I hear you. So would you say what you just said is kind of, it alludes to the dichotomy you drew between the kind of commercial, superficial practices and the genuine, legitimate astrologists who are committed to the craft? And I have to push on that point you raised about the people who are qualified in regards to astrology, because I remember, I think it was last month, you told me that you interacted with an astrologer, I believe, or someone who helps with readings. So you said people of that sort who are genuine are gifted. So would you define the gift as a divine gift? And if so, would you see it as something that they're born with, or do you want to elaborate on that point?
I mean, I think I have an example that can really make light to this, because when I went to this woman like a month ago, I think, and she basically read my birth chart, and she did like a full reading of every planet, whatever it means, the time I was born, and blah.
Before you proceed, do you want to explain what a birth chart is for people who might not know?
Yeah, so basically a birth chart is a map of every planet and every position. It was the time you were born, the place you were born. So you need to know your time, the time you were born and the place you were born. And it's basically the planets and each sign that falls into that planet and into that. It's very birth charts are very complicated. Even I don't really understand how they work, because they also have a lot of houses that your sign can be in, and that also influences a lot. So that's why you need somebody very qualified in order to give you kind of accurate answers of your birth chart. But for example, when she did read my birth chart, she said I was born on a new moon energy. So when I was born, there was new moon. And basically the new moon is known for being how do you say it? Like a new energy, because it's the new moon. It really just brings something innovative about it. And usually people that are born on the new moon, or a day or a second after the new moon, they have more potential of having a very high power of manifestations, because they're born near the new moon. So people like that she told me that I have a very big potential of manifestations, and that I would, for example, if I try to turn it into a career reading, then I would work well in environments that deal with high energies, such as radio, television. She said something about being a pilot, like something that works with high energies because of that new moon energy. So
Yeah.
that's one example of how insane a birth chart reading can be. Like, there are so many nuances and so many details that are in it that you're not even aware of. So I think that's the beauty of astrology, because it's a whole new universe that you can just be put in, and it's very nice to have a guide, sort of.
Yeah. Well, you're selling it really well. I think that's really, and her reading really resonated with you. Like, you'd say that it really spoke to you. You felt like when the person was giving you a reading. Oh, powerful. Okay, so I think next, you know, you kind of, I think, sold astrology really well, but I'd like to give you another opportunity to speak to how you feel astrology has benefited you, because with conversations like ones that surround astrology, for example, from what I've seen online, there's super technical conversations where sometimes there's scientific people. I saw, for example, kind of the common ground, or I think it's Jubilee, the YouTube channel. They held an episode where astrologists face astronomers, and it was like a technical debate. One was trying to debunk or disprove the other. Well, I'd say it was directed towards the astrological side more. And I think within religious circles too, there's somewhat of an attitude of renunciation towards astrology. So sometimes there's a technical element to the conversation on one hand. On the other hand, there are anecdotal elements of the conversation where people are trying to share experiences like the one that you had with your reader. I want us to chat about your experience, as stated, but also about maybe some of the technical like arguments that people have tried to wage against astrology, some of the criticism. So, for instance, I know within the scientific field, some people say, you know, astrology, it's based upon evidence that's based upon confirmation bias. It's unsystematic. There's no consensus. It's pie in the sky. It's airy fairy. That which is in the sky has little bearing on the world. Things of this sort. And it's really it's unfalsifiable, a lot of the claims, and hard to disprove because of how it's designed. That the claims that are made that are somewhat scientific have all been disproved. There's a lot of claims of this sort that I would greatly agree with, but like I remember speaking to you before my YouTube video on religion that I made. I made a YouTube video on religion. I advise you to check it out if you haven't already. And in the video, what I basically argued was that despite the fact that within the world of objective scientific truth, religion, I believe, has no place whatsoever. And when it tries to take over that sphere, people like Galileo, the scientist who proposed scientific ideas that clashed with religious principles, were oppressed. So religion has no room or leg room in the scientific realm. However, there is a world that you can call a world of religious truths, within which we can identify principles, axioms, ways of being and living, where we can identify meaning and purpose. And I use the example of the Pinocchio movie. That movie is not objectively scientifically truthful, and that there is no such guy as a puppet as a guy called Pinocchio. But when I watch the movie, I take principles and quotes from the movie. If you look at the story of Moses in the Bible, he opened up the Red Sea. A lot of archaeologists, I'm sure, would argue that Moses, there's no proof that he existed. But it's not to say there's a story of him bringing the Israelites from Egypt to the Promised Land is not deeply powerful and doesn't possess deep truths in regards to our existence. So with astrology, would you say that some of the criticisms don't appreciate the underlying value that it has to offer in regards to meaning, purpose, and principles, codes we can take to live a good life, the life that, it's clear that you're trying to live?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic thing is that everybody's entitled to believe what they want. But for me, I can understand why somebody would find astrology inaccurate, or it's just like a fairy tale. Sure, it's nice to hear, but it has no real life impact or anything like that. But I think the question is not necessarily, is it true or not? Can it be scientifically proven or not? I think the question, it shouldn't relate to something objectively, like it shouldn't be something objective. It shouldn't be something general. I think it really is about individual. So I think that if for me, what I read resonates with me, I mean, I am truly, like, if I believe it, then for me, that's going to be my objective reality. That's going to be my truth. And I think if I'm convinced, then the exterior world will confirm that for me. If I believe that astrology is not real, I think I will look outside for any evidence that confirms that for astrology is not real. And I think that's the power of your mind. I mean, maybe mind, there's your mind is, it's like it can create a whole new world for you. It can be like the way you perceive things, it's your reality. It's I don't know if that's the ultimate objective real reality, but for me that's reality. So I think it's very positive that there's criticism to astrology, because if there was only good things to say, then I mean there wouldn't be any debates, and debates really raise a lot of new ideas that also raise another good concepts that are just good for humanity in general. So I think criticisms are good because it raises discussions. And I think it's very important to have doubts as a human being. If you think, oh yeah, I am 100% astrology is real, then I mean, you might be proven otherwise in 10 years from now. And I'm not saying that I trust my life. I trust astrology with my life. I will blindly guide myself after that. But for me, it's some sort of comfort, some sort of just belief. Like it's impossible for me to explain it because it's not something scientific. It's not something, yes, it's X that led me to Y and that equals Z. No, it's simply just, it's more of a feeling. And I really don't know how to properly explain a feeling. It's something that I feel. And if I explain it to you, it's definitely not going to be the same definition as how you feel the same thing that I do. So I think criticism is very important, and I can understand it. And I think it really depends on how everybody filters their experience. So it's something very small can happen to me and can be so life changing for me, but it might not be for another person. And that's good because I think we're all on our own path. And if you would read your birth chart, you would know about your path. But yeah, I think criticism is good, and anybody defines their reality the way it works for them. And for me, astrology for now is giving me a sense of hope and a sense of comfort. And I think that's why maybe I choose to believe in it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it answers your question or not.
Definitely does. And I really appreciate the sincerity and the humility as well. I really do think we need more of that. Ironically, at the end of my video on religion, I encourage humility in how we approach different subjects, and encourage an approach that does not see us denying the power, the value that something might have to add in how we engage in discourse, engage with one another. And I think that humility, that sort of humility, was inundated throughout your answers. So yeah, no, your answer is fantastic. My next question then is about religion. You know what? Before we get into religion, because that's probably bringing us in a whole, it's a radically different direction. I first want to ask you about what you think the value is, because I know you've touched on this already in a lot of your answers, but I want to give you, of course, dedicated time to speak to what you see it, the benefit of astrology, or what you see the value of astrology being. You talked about meaning, about purpose, about that feeling you have, that intuition you have, that it embraces, that allows you to map the world and find something in the world in chaos that you can turn into order and make meaning out of. So what would you say to people listening about the benefits of astrology, generally speaking?
Well, astrology, if we're speaking of astrology per se, I'd say it's like a little light you can have in this very chaotic path of discovering your life. So I think, but then again, I think this only works if you believe in it. And I think it can help you just decipher things about your potential. I'm not, because let's say when I did my birth chart and that woman told me I have this very big creative influence in my life. and it's something it looks like I should follow. It doesn't necessarily mean that this is exactly what I will do, or my life is set in this order, and I already know what's going to happen in my life. Because astrology won't tell you what happens tomorrow, but it tells you about potential energy that can influence the day of tomorrow. And if you choose to follow that potential, then this is a likely result you may get. It doesn't mean that this is exactly what's going to happen, because I don't really believe in a very specific destiny that we all have. And that's another discussion about destiny. I also have opinions on destiny, but I don't think there's this clear bullet points that you will go through. But I think astrology could be very helpful to just give you a little insight of the potential you may have in this world. That's for astrology. For spirituality as a
Yes,
whole,
yes, yes,
I
yes.
think I think it's to me it's spirituality to me is more of a lesson to search from within. So I think it's it's not a lesson about your outside world. It starts within, and I think that by the spirituality is just really helpful to make peace with yourself, to just be in touch with your own self, with your higher self. And I think that's just gonna ease your way into the exterior world.
Wow, this is yeah, very interesting. No, it's striking. Look, so many things are running through my mind at once. I have to say that I really respect your criticism of the idea of predestination, as if things are just made and predetermined and are decided beforehand. I think this is actually a criticism of astrology, because astrology is ancient. Like, I think it was like our first attempt as a civilization to do astronomy, and a lot of, I think one, the I forget the specific term. Believe it starts with a P, but the fact that the world spins at a particular angle, early astrologers actually discovered this without the technology that we have today, which is incredibly impressive. But Cicero, who was like a Roman orator, criticized astrology because of uh, the fact that people made predictions as to what would happen to others in the future, or people in the future, as a result of things out of their control. And the Christian tradition, predetermination, as it was called, was very popular too. St. Augustine promoted the idea that you and I, because of things completely out of our control, were destined to go to heaven or hell, no matter what we did. So I really do concur and agree with your criticism of that aspect of astrology and spirituality. Like, why thoughts were flowing through my head rapidly is because there's such a, I think, underlying link between like so many, like, not only religious traditions, but like what you said about spirituality. It gives you power because of the internal aspect of the world that connects you to your higher self. Plato, the philosopher, spoke of how there was a world of ideas, and that's where truth was, and everything that we see in the world is fake, and the world of ideas reflects itself in the world. So you and I, you're looking at Eric, I'm looking at Larissa, but we're merely we're reflections of an abstract, better, more divine version of ourselves in the world of ideas. And that really was, I could hear that in what you're saying. And in a lot of philosophical traditions, there's similar rhetoric used to define things. And even when I listen to meditation, I've tried to uptake more meditation. This is the type of rhetoric that is used, and it's really helpful.
Yes. And I mean, I think spirituality is very powerful because, first of all, I think there's so many forms of expressing spirituality through meditation, astrology, numerology, tarot readings, whatever you want. There's like plenty of forms you can do that. But I think in the end, I think what really, for me, sets apart spirituality from religion is that it really offers you the power to it offers you the power in space to create your own definition of what faith is to you. Whereas the traditional religion, the religious view on religion and God and good or bad, the good or evil, the devil, hell, heaven, all of that. I think it's such, it's, I think it's the tradition, super traditional, super, I don't even, it's like this sort of structure makes you want to break the rules, right? Because this is how we work as a society. There's rules, oh, then we have to break them. So I think this sort of structure that religion kind of gives you or used to for a long time is what makes you be so skeptical. Whereas spirituality kind of, it's there and you can choose to. Nobody forces you, nobody tells you this is the way to do it. If you resonate with it, then it's simply your choice. So if it's your choice, then you're not going to have a problem with it. So I think that's the beauty of spirituality compared to religion.
That's really, really interesting. I have a ton of comments to make on that point, but I have to
Bring them on, Eric. Come with
no, nothing, nothing that would take the form of an
I'm
attack.
armed with knowledge.
No, no, absolutely. No, but before okay, that's really, I just find it really interesting, and I think it's because okay, I'll make two comments of the possible dozen. One is that I actually made this point previously that there's so many similarities in how you're speaking, as you said, like, about spirituality with meditation, but also with like Stoicism. It's a philosophy that greatly informs how I try to behave in my life. It really inspires a lot of my personal principles. I hear so much similarities between the Stoics, like conceptualization of nature being this all-encompassing thing that we're all of and that we all return to, and what you're saying about spirituality. Of course, Plato's example, the Platonic example of the world of ideas, also aligns with what you said too. So I see this as being, how I interpret it is a repository of ancient wisdom that we can all tap into to access. Like, this is how I see a lot of religious traditions, and I prefer using the term religious traditions rather than organized religion per se, or the monotheistic, polytheistic. A lot of these religious traditions, some from the East, for example, Taoism, Confucianism, some from Africa, which I'm yet to familiarize myself with, some from the Western world, Mesopotamia. These are religions within which deep principles are nested. And I think accessing them, appreciating them as meaning systems, firstly, and not conflating them with objective science, and accessing the value they can provide, I think is really powerful. And the second thing I had to say is a nice segue into the next question I have for you. It's about the fact that I read an article from the New York Times in which it talked about young people and spirituality and astrology and religion. And I don't know if you recall, there was a study that I think we both had to consult for a course that we took last semester.
The Pew report.
Yeah, Pew report. And it found that young people's retention, engagement with religion is declining rapidly throughout the Western world. And a lot of people claim to be spiritual but not religious. So it speaks to the kind of prominence of spirituality in regards to people's personal lives and how they navigate it relative to religion. And the poll, or rather the article I read in the New York Times, found through its engagement with some young people that a lot of young people like spirituality because of its formlessness, as you put it, because of the fact that there's no traditional structure. It doesn't possess some of the aggressive elements of religious texts, for example, the misogyny. This is what was stated in the article. Some of the other parts that are quite arbitrary and forceful and morally strict, one might call it, but it's quite formless. And also the abuses of religious figures. You mentioned how earlier there's some astrologers who can abuse astrology for their own gain. This can occur within religious bodies or groups also. From my example, as a Nigerian, as someone of Nigerian descent, I've heard countless stories of priests and pastors abusing religion, abusing Christianity, to become millionaires, televangelists. Yeah,
it's easy to make money off people that come to you in very, very vulnerable states, just waiting for hope, and it's very easy to sell that hope for your own personal interest.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think you can make a business out of it. And I think in the same report, in the same Pew report that we had to read for that class, I remember, which was very interesting to me, that people that are neither, they don't identify as being neither religious or spiritual, they tend to not believe in any of these.
Mm.
So that made me think, it's like, why? I mean, you don't believe, but you tend to say, but I don't believe, but I think it's not true.
Mm.
Because if you don't believe, then you're like in a neutral state. You know, I choose not to believe because neither if you think it's true or not. You just don't care, right? But I think it's just, this is an effect of how social media portrays both religion and spirituality. And I think it has both negative and positive impact, but I think it's a little bit more on the negative side rather than the positive one, because it's like you said, you can just make people believe something, if even with like motivational speakers, right? If you have this really, which you do, you do have this talent of being persuasive just by talking. It's easy to sell something these days, especially online. So selling, and especially that, I think, as a society, I don't know if it's true what I'm saying or not, but I think that as a society now, we tend to be more inclined to believing the worst faster rather than the good part, because we're always expecting what's worst because you want to be prepared or whatever. So I think you're more likely to believe the bad things you hear about astrology rather than hearing all the positive aspects that can bring into your life, because you'd say it's too good to be true. Why would I believe that?
Okay, man. Okay. Gosh, again, so many things to say.
You know, that's why it's an interesting topic, regardless if it's true or not. It's very interesting to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea of truth or what is true, again, going back to what we both alluded to earlier, is very interesting. The idea of truth, true per se. There's a million ways to see there's a million ways to see all of the things in the world. And actually, the clinical psychologists who I referenced in my video about religion, Jordan Peterson, he's very passionate about talking about religion and perception and how there are multiple ways in which we can see things. And I think this immediately places the topic, the subject of truth, out for us all to consider. Because despite the fact that within, again, the scientific realm, the objective realm of scientific fact, there are things that belong there and things that obviously don't. And when you try and shove those things there, again, religion, Galileo, it can't necessarily work. There are other realms that exist too that all have an impact on the human experience. And when you deny the existence of other versions of truth, which you might live by unknowingly, I think you're thinking in somewhat of a naive and simplistic way. This is one of the only definitive conclusions I've come to in regards to religion, my thinking on religion so far. But you also said something, and I'm throwing on my, like, as I said to you, Stoicism, the philosophy greatly informs my set of personal principles, but so does Christianity to a great extent. And that's something that I can't help because I was born in a Christian environment, so I have a deep engagement with it. So throwing on the Christian hat or the organized religion hat, before we actually delve deeply into that subject, some from that perspective would criticize what you said about formlessness and what was said by the young people who commented in the New York Times article about the fact that they're sick of a rigid traditional structure. They criticize that. They say that that is the way of the world. That's the way of the devil. It opens a door for impulses. And when I say devil, I mean it in a figurative way.
Yeah, yeah, got it.
It opens the door for, but despite the fact that I say it in a figurative way, the implications of the devil, as per how I speak to, let's say, my friends, is very truthful. Like as a figurative representation of the worst of where we can go if we don't act in accordance with what we know to be right. So they say formlessness opens the door for our human impulses, barbaric human impulses, to just unleash themselves and take over us. Like there's a quote, one of my favorite quotes from the Bible is a quote from the book of Mark that says, "What good is the world gaining the world if you lose your soul?" And I actually think spirituality would applaud that quote too. Marcus Aurelius, a Stoic philosopher, he had that, he shared that quote prior to its iteration in the Bible. So this is a criticism: the fact that there's no structure, there's no. It's like walking into a supermarket, and you don't have a shopping list, so you can buy anything. And if you can buy anything, you can buy the super sugary foods. You can buy a ton of alcohol. You can buy everything that's terrible for you because you have nothing to guide you. I actually think within psychological literature, the idea of excessive amounts of choice is actually somewhat impactful in a negative manner in how we think and how we reason and how we behave. So, what would you say to that? What would you say to the idea that organized religion might provide a structure that is lacking in the formless nature, as you put it, in spirituality or even astrology?
I mean, sure, I think structure does bring benefits because there's structures, there's a sort of expectations of how things work, which brings again a sort of comfort because you're somehow prepared because you know how the world works, but you're never fully prepared for anything because you might think you have all the answers, but you'll be shocked. And I think nature in itself is very, it has a very, I don't know how to pronounce it, duality, has a duality, right? Because there's always been night, day, good, bad. There's been death, birth. I mean, there's this duality nature to it. And I think it's sort of structure tries to sort of control that, gives you an idea of that. But I think what is interesting in spirituality is that it might lack form, but let's say, because you said at one point that maybe deep down our nature is to be like animals, this barbaric nature of, oh, I'm gonna fight for this, and all this dark thoughts, maybe there's a dark side in each, because maybe that's in our nature, because in our nature there's two things, right? There's light and there's dark. So what if this dark side just captures more of you, and that's why all these atrocities happen? But I think, or at least how I would like to think about it, is that because there's no sort of structure in spirituality, it gives you freedom of tackling this darkness, right? Because in such a structured form, you're like, oh, there's this darkness inside me. It shouldn't be. What do I do? Go there or ask for advice from priests, or you need to go, you feel this, go to church. This is a very basic example, but I'm just trying to make it simple to understand. So there's this sort of way of knowing how you should deal with them, and it's like asking from help from outside because of this structure. Whereas I think in spirituality, because there's no form, I think it's more like accepting this darkness, which is very hard to do, because by accepting it, maybe there's a risk of not giving a fuck anymore, and you're like, there you go, I'm a bad person. But I think just there's a chance that by accepting this, you accept your whole self. And I don't know, it's just very hard for me, but by accepting your whole self, it's like there's this peace that comes with it. And how can this peace just create something bad? I don't know if this is a very dreamy, idealistic way of thinking. Maybe it's just me. There's a lot of bad things happening in the world that are maybe impossible to justify to some extent. But I think that if people just were just not so scared of making peace with all this darkness that's inside. And I think that because you're scared of it, you try to ignore it, or you choose the easy way to deal with it, which is by, oh, I feel this, I'm gonna go to this person and he's gonna help me. Like, no, the real work comes from within, which is, I think, why spirituality is like working for me. And that's why this sort of non-standard way of dealing with and accepting all of this is much more efficient to me than how like traditional religion sells it to you.
So would you say then that through spirituality, it's not about negating negative aspects of one's personality. It's about accepting it and from there working on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you put it really well. Like, I think
But
I've been
because
rambling on, but I think that's like, I think the more you accept the negative thoughts, the more positive thoughts will raise from it.
yeah. So,
Right.
and I can actually think of it like religion. One of the flaws, the deepest flaws, I think, regarding organized religion that you have articulated, like literally indirectly, you've hit the nail on the head. Is if you take attitudes towards sex, for example, sex was something that was just absolutely despised. That's in a Christian context. If you look at the conduct of the Catholic Church, just deeply demonized. And it's a part of us as human beings, us Homo sapiens. We have an impulse of sex. There's an evolutionary explanation for that. If we didn't have that, you and I would not be here.
Yeah.
It serves us, it serves our genes, it allows us to propagate our genes into the future. But religion took a super ultra negative attitude towards something like sex, or even you can use ample examples of things that religion has merely, simply demonized, for example. And this would be a rejection of an aspect of the human being. But if I was to apply what you said about spirituality, I could learn to accept the fact that I have that impulse as a Homo sapien, but then work to regulate it in holistic, helpful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And where would Larissa find the principles that she would use to help herself regulate it out of curiosity?
What did you ask? Because I didn't get the last part. Where would you find?
Yeah, the principles that you would help in your case, where would you get the principles? Like, because spirituality is formless, does it open you up to look to, let's say, one religion, or look to a bit of philosophical tradition, look to X, Y, and Z to
Mm-hmm.
form principles that help you navigate your life? Or is there a set of principles represented in, let's say, the type of spirituality you practice that guides you, in a sense, in a not so structured way per se?
Mm-hmm. I think most of this interest I have in spirituality was born within me by my friend. So my best friend had a huge influence on me with the most of the stuff that I know on spirituality. So even by the people around you, you can find so much wisdom in what people say if you just listen. Like, it's crazy, but I think to me that was a big part of just listening to people around me, because there's so many times that somebody like your mom, you'd say, why does my mom know? She knows nothing about what I'm dealing with. But just by listening to her and then take it to your own filter, it's gonna be it was very awakening for me. That's one. And another, I mean, there's also Indian religions are, there's like a lot of knowledge about that, and it's a very spiritual focus on it. So it's not the way that I would know it in Christianity. Like, nobody talked to me in Christianity about karma or karmic energy. I wouldn't have heard from that from the Bible. But I think look, this is a positive aspect of social media. There's a lot of spiritual leaders, most of them Indians, that you can find on YouTube that are so insightful and just so full of like, I don't know if it's their uh, just gift of speaking in public, but they're very very insightful. So I think there's one I really like, Sadhguru, which my boyfriend introduced me to. I would definitely tell people to check him out because he's got some powerful videos. So I think just this searching, if you're interested in something, there's no way you're not gonna find something about it. It's just like it, and most of the time you don't even have to find it. It kind of finds its way to you, right? So I
Yeah.
think just by checking sources, there's of course many books that you can find online on spirituality
Yeah.
that are very good. There's one actually that my friend recently recommended me, which you might know, but I think it's called The Power of Now or Power of Earth. I'm not sure, but I will let you know and we can put it at the end of the video or something.
Yeah. No, that sounds good. But that's really interesting, really, really fascinating. And Eastern religions, of course, I think Hinduism actually embraces astrology to some extent, if I'm not mistaken. And Hinduism is a very non-hierarchical
Mm-hmm.
religion in how it's kind of control. It's the world's oldest religion too, if I can call it a religion. So that's really interesting. Sadhguru, of course, he's
You know him?
yeah, the big beard.
Yeah, I love him. Actually, I really listened to a video of him recently, which really struck me because he was talking about the significance of timing in life and how timing, everything kind of comes down to timing. Because if you treat things in your life as this is important, this is not important, you end up living half your life. Because if he said that you should, there are things happening in your life that you should put equal interest in it, regardless if it's drinking a glass of water or going to take an exam. You should have the same amount of intensity of how you're living that moment in order to gain a full insight of your life. And if things are not important to you at all, then why do you do them? Why do you put that much energy in something that it's not gonna it's not gonna have any importance to you? So I was like, this is very insightful. I mean, he of course he said it much nicer than I did. So maybe that also helps in being believing what he's saying, but he's very smart man.
Yeah, he's an interesting figure. I've seen
You
one or
should
two
you
clips.
should have him on your podcast.
I don't think it's a question of me having him as much of a question of allowing himself to come on, or rather accepting my invitation.
I think he would be very impressed by you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I think he'd be impressed by you too. um, yeah, okay. We delved into a lot there, and I want to get on to young people and pop culture, because that's of course one of the reasons why I'm making this video. Because again, I stated maybe many times in this podcast already, and because I grew up in a Christian environment, so that greatly informs how I see the world. But also, my mind is open to doing, as both of us acknowledged, is the important work of extracting knowledge, wisdom, insight from as many sources as we can. Because the more you do that, the more you grow and learn, and cutting yourself off to that is disadvantaging yourself, or putting yourself at a disadvantage, rather, to use the technically correct term. But young people in pop culture today both seem to have really embraced spirituality and astrology. And
Mhm.
it's really funny because a lot of, again, coming from the traditional religious background, a lot of people I know within that community detest spirituality, detest astrology. They see it as the mechanism, the device, the way of the devil. And I think there are parts of the Bible that people have referenced that talk about how God is opposed, the God of the Bible, Yahweh, is opposed to this. And I'm sure the other monotheistic faiths can do this to Judaism and Islam. But beyond that, young people that I know, a lot of them, they find the crystals, they're watching the videos, they know they're very literate in regards to chakras, and they're into astrology. They care for their star signs. They believe that the chart has a bearing on how they live their lives. So why do you think pop culture and young people have gravitated towards this a lot? I know we referenced the NY Times article. You shared your thoughts on this to some extent already, but what do you think is the underlying reason for why young people have gravitated away from organized religion and towards astrology and spirituality?
I think it's because of the openness it offers. Like there's no rigid way of how you should perceive faith. I think it's like it's exactly the what I said is that it kind of gives you the space to create your own idea of what faith is to you and how you want to experience it and practice it and just give how like what you feel and what you give back. It's up to you. And I think that this way social media kind of now portrays spirituality versus religion. I think even this competitiveness, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, but I think even this is harmful to because it shouldn't be a competition. There's no like you should choose spirituality because it's much better. No, you should choose religion because look, you're gonna go to heaven and everything's gonna be great. But I think it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be you do this, then you're this. It's really just what resonates with you. And it shouldn't matter if it's spiritual, like what name it has. If it offers you peace, that should be the goal of both religion and spirituality. Because like you said, in the end, what they both have in common is the idea of soul, of this powerful energy that is within every each of us. So you can be an atheist, you can be a spiritual person or a religious person. It's you're connected anyway because within all of us there's this energy that both spirituality and religion were born of, because if there wasn't this energy then we wouldn't be talking about any of them. So I think that people just gravitate towards it more now because of how open it looks at it. And on a more technical note, maybe even the language is much easier because religious literature is very hard to read. It's like, what is this? And I think now spiritual leaders, spiritual important like spirituality gurus are they kind of speak in a way it resonates with modern society and with younger population. So maybe because it feels much closer to what you know and what you understand, that's why people gravitate towards it now more than ancient religious texts, which are also very interesting. But if it doesn't resonate with you, and it's just that message is not going to get to you, it's all for nothing.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what an answer. I think I concur completely with a lot of what you said. And I'm just so happy to have had you on. I really enjoyed the discussion, the conversation. I think we could probably go on for decades.
Yeah.
Probably will. It's just that this is the nature of the conversation. It's a conversation we human beings have been having as long as we've been. Something that was said in the NY Times article, something I said in my video about religion, and something I fundamentally believe is that there's the same way I kind of talked about the barbaric impulse that we might have that you acknowledge when you talk about embracing the dark and light side of lighter side of the human being. I do believe we have a religious impulse. And in my video, I talked about it in an evolutionary context. And although I'm not privy to the technical evolutionary arguments for the religious nature of human beings, I think if you look at every single civilization across our history, religion has found its place, or spirituality, by the way, I have to say, has found its place in that society. Some coping mechanism, some acknowledgement of the spiritual side of the human being. And despite the fact that I would not allude to the spirit in scientific terms, in a scientific context, because it's not possible, I do think it's a very useful idea that has been used in philosophy, that has been used in spirituality, and that has been used in religion. And one that I definitely apply in my private life, and one that I think helps me, that clearly helps you. Yeah, there's so much. I will definitely have you back.
Yeah, I know there's like so many topics that you can discuss on and on, but I think like mainly like the most important thing I would like anyone who listens to this conversation between it to leave with is that I think why a spirituality and astrology is important to me is because it's a tool that can make this search of your inner self just much more easier and insightful. And I think ultimately we shouldn't be scared of looking inside. We should just be very curious about it. And I think spirituality is a very good starting point.
Wow. Well, you've done your job and you sold it like a pro.
Yeah, anybody now, come to me for a spiritual reading.
Oh gosh, don't fall into the temptation of being commercializing it.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you again for coming on, Larry. It was so great having you on and
Thank
conversing
you
with
for inviting me. This was my first time on a podcast and I really loved it.
I'm so glad you enjoyed it. And Larissa also helped me with the video I put out on King Leopold II. So
Yeah.
if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not, head over to the Aracosa YouTube channel and check out my King
Go,
Leopold.
go, King Leopold.
You're gonna get us cancelled.
I know. No, just cut that last part. I didn't mean it.
But yeah, thank you so much, Larissa. It was so lovely having this conversation, and I'm sure I'll have you back again to chat about similar subjects into the future.
Thank you, Eric.